increased by an order of magnitude when Travis came in, because not that Graves worked hard, but Travis is like orders of magnitude more intensity. 1% ownership was the equity grant was going to be associated with this. It was a exploding offer. I had to decide, I think within 24 hours, or the offer was going to expire. I declined the offer. Travis knew that I had been offered and that I declined kind of this earlier one. And so, fast forward a number of years, Uber's valuation as a business has grown substantially. Travis would always introduce me to people as, this is Dom. He had the most expensive senior year of college ever. Maybe at that point we were doing a dozen trips a week. It turns out there were 3 drivers on the system. There was so little demand. There were so few riders. We were paying drivers hourly just to keep the phones on their dashboard, just do some graphs and some charts kind of core metrics in our internal tools. And so I had a chart for, user sign up by day and by hour, or trips by day and by hour. And like when I first did that, it was almost hard to know if my code was working because they were basically all zeros. It was while I was in my senior year that Travis came in and replaced Graves as CEO.
Hi, welcome to the first episode of a very exciting series where I'm hosting Dom Narducci, who is the most tenured employee at Uber. He has been with Uber since its inception days, when Uber used to do only 2 rides per day. He has seen every bit of Uber's journey and is willing to share it with us. Please watch the video till the end, and you will get to see the most unscripted version of Uber's journey. It's a pleasure to host Dom, who is one of the most tenured person in Uber. He has been with Uber from his internship days in 2010, and he has seen all of the journey, right? And I believe with this conversation, our listeners will learn a lot from your journey, Dom. And thanks a lot for doing this today.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity, and thanks for the chance. This should be fun. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. So let's start from the beginning, right? Before Uber, right? What were you doing? What were you aiming in life? What was going through your mind? And how did you end up getting to know about Uber and, let's say, the internship part of it?
Sure. It's a bit of a long and winding journey. So let me zoom all the way back to when I was in high school, and maybe actually even before that, early in high school. I had always wanted to be a pilot, a commercial pilot. My grandma had a pilot's license, and so I would listen to stories from her when she was a young adult, kind of flying small planes, and I always found that really fascinating. And then I remember watching the original X Prize competition, which was this $1 million prize to incentivize companies to figure out a suborbital flight that could eventually be used for tourism, passengers up above the common line, and like a taste of space, basically. And I remember reading about this and seeing some of these early flights. There was a company called Scaled Composites, led by a guy named Burt Rutan, who had just really interesting ideas on aircraft design and manufacturing. And I just fell more and more in love with this idea of flight and kind of everything surrounding it. My grandma would say things: God does not deduct from man's allotted time his hours spent flying, like all of these sayings. And I just loved the idea. And so kind of through high school, towards the end of that process, you start to look at colleges and you try to, start to figure out when you get to choose for yourself classes and what you want to do with your career. And so commercial piloting, always in the back of my mind. I wanted to work, flight from New York to LA and spend the night there. And then the next day I fly to Hawaii, and then the next day I fly somewhere else. Just seemed like, what an amazing career. You could see the world, all of these pieces. And so, as I looked out at the corpus of universities and school offerings kind of after, for college and in various places, there were a couple schools that floated to the top and were really like recognized names for the aviation industry. So I ended up applying to really the top tier school, Embry-Riddle. They have 2 campuses, one in Daytona Beach, one in Prescott, Arizona. I had previously been to the Southwest on a Boy Scout trip a number of years earlier, and I loved New Mexico, Arizona, all these pieces. I'm from Connecticut, and so that's pretty far away from New England. But it kind of all worked out. That is a place. When I was looking for colleges, my mom somewhat famously took out a map and drew a 500-mile radius around Connecticut and said, pick a school outside of here. You're not going to be the kind of kid who's coming home every weekend from college to do your laundry. Go out in the world. And so Arizona aligned well with that. I loved the Southwest. I worked for the school. And so I applied, I got in. And one of the important details for you to do in the summer, kind of before starting your freshman year, if you're entering the flight program, is to just do a bunch of the things that you'll need to do as prerequisites to get your pilot's license in the first place. You'll get your license as part of school, but there's stuff you got to do ahead of time. One of them is to do a medical exam, because there are thresholds for vision, thresholds for fitness for you to be a pilot. And so I go and I do my medical. And it turns out I have a non-correctable vision problem that keeps me under the threshold required to become a commercial pilot. Now, commercial pilot is really kind of the top tier type of license that you can have. And so the requirements are a little bit lighter for like a private pilot's license. So I did end up getting my private pilot's license, my PPL, because I could satisfy those requirements. But I couldn't do the commercial one, which was really, it was all I wanted to do in life. I had really built up a lot of this idea of Dom as an adult flying the heavy metal around the skies. And so had to figure out a new strategy. This was relatively coming up on like first day of freshman year. It was kind of too late to go to other schools in the first place, reapply. We were well past that. And so my dad kind of said, you already got accepted here. The acceptance to the school is broad and general. It's not to a specific program. Why don't you just see whatever else they have going on? I'm sure they have, an engineering program, something like that. I was good at science and math anyways. And so I ended up doing that. I swapped over to the aerospace engineering program. Interestingly enough, just as that expanded over my 4 years at Embry-Riddle, aerospace engineering branches off into being either space focused or aeronautics, kind of plane focused. And I ended up not doing the aeronautics. I ended up doing space side. So I even kind of deviated farther from my original goal, but went to Embry-Riddle. And so, kind of grew these technical skills in an engineering context. But in the back of my mind, I was always thinking back to these programming skills that I had picked up just as a hobby in middle school and high school. In those years, I was in theater. I was not on a sports team. I was like much more nerd than popular. And so sitting at home on my computer was a little bit more interesting to me, and kind of picking up some of these skills rather than, I don't know, whatever the popular kids do in high school. I wasn't aware of what they were doing. I was not invited to those events. And so, I had taught this stuff to myself. I learned HTML. I learned JavaScript when I wanted that to be dynamic. I learned some server-side languages. I think PHP I was early on, and CGI and some of these technologies, but always just to solve kind of individual, personal challenges. And so, there were aspects of that in my academic career. Certainly there was some programming, and MATLAB has its own scripting language. And there was stuff that I used kind of throughout my studies, but not really. It was mostly just stuff I was doing for my personal projects. And so I always toyed with this idea of, yes, I'm thinking about aerospace engineering. Yes, that means I'd probably end up in like a Boeing or a Lockheed Martin or something like that. But what if I could turn this hobby that I enjoyed, this programming thing, into a real career? Like, surely that's a job that people have, right? But I hadn't really pursued that much. I knew Google was already an entity at this time that had a reputation for hiring, the best and brightest programmers. And so there were echoes of that. And frankly, coming to a school in Arizona, much more so than when I was at home in Connecticut, did expose me to people who were coming from the Silicon Valley area, San Francisco area. And as luck would kind of have it, I think it was the father of like an adjacent person in my dorm. I think he was a VP at Yahoo or something. And so like this kind of refreshed my memory that tech industry is actually a thing. And that could be in my mind. But frankly, on the aerospace side, internships weren't a big thing, especially in the early years. And so I was in school, but I wasn't really making too many plans in those first couple of years of what my life would be like post school. But I was kind of, all this stuff was in the back of my mind. And at the same time, both during school semesters and the summers in between, on my computer all the time, I'm still working on personal projects, nothing that went particularly anywhere, but it all kind of builds on each other. And so, finally we get to what is the summer before my senior year, which is what I kind of regarded as probably my last like long vacation or long kind of time to myself. Because again, at this point, I was still assuming I would graduate in a year, go work at Boeing or one of these other giant aerospace companies, big government contractors, the places where you go and you work for 40 or 50 years and then you retire with your big pension and that's kind of it. And so if this was 2.5 months, 3 months before my senior year, really my last chance to do something kind of on my own, have some downtime before, I don't know, I start accruing 2 weeks of vacation a year or whatever it is in those kinds of environments. And so I'm at home to set the stage in Connecticut, on my computer, kind of hanging out, not really doing anything. I did have some friends at this point where we would play ultimate frisbee on a Wednesday afternoon or something. But beyond that, I was really not doing anything, really trying to take in the last downtime I thought I was going to have. But what that really meant I was doing is I was sitting at home and just cruising around the internet because that's just kind of what I did. And by cruising around the internet, I specifically mean I was using a website that I loved called StumbleUpon. And the idea of StumbleUpon was that you would put in kind of your interests, your preferences. The tool existed as a browser extension, kind of sat above your URL bar in Firefox or whatever I was using at the time. It would watch the sites that you went to, like keep track of the domains that you had gone to. And if you were to hit the stumble button, which is kind of the big piece of this extension, it would bring you to a website with a blog post or something that you had never seen before. You had never come across this content, but that matched your interests. So this was very cool, and I think there were probably like thumbs up and thumbs down buttons. So you could kind of continue to build a profile on this thing over time. But it was like just a wonderful content discovery engine. And so, I'd hit stumble and I'd find an article about a plane, and I'd hit stumble again and I'd find an article about, I don't know, New England or Arizona or whatever my preferences were. And a lot of times I would hit stumble and I would come across like software development and technical blog posts or just other websites or open source things. Yeah, I don't know, whatever I was doing at the time. And so I early on in that summer, I hit StumbleUpon. And it brings me to a website that is just the main page, and it's ubercab.com. And you can't really tell always why it brings you to a page. And sometimes I believe the revenue model was kind of ad based, where companies could pay for their website to kind of show up to people. And so you don't really know why you ended up with something in front of you. Did someone pay for this, or was this actually my interest? And so you always kind of had to explore the site that you were given to see whether it resonates with you or not. And so, if I'm kind of making up a memory here, the page had like maybe a map of San Francisco, not that I recognize that, and like a big icon of a Lincoln Town car, and there was a little bit of text on it. But it was, it was enough to kind of pique my interest. It said this was a new company, this was a new idea starting up, that you could, click a button on your phone and a fancy car shows up to you. And I'm like, all right, that's cool. That's interesting, fine. And so I'm clicking around the site a little bit, and I go to, they had a blog, as everyone did, and it had a series of posts. And I read a post that was basically, it was a recruiting pitch. The name of the post was something about, what is it like to work at UberCab? And it was kind of a cheesy post, and it was like, there'd be like a sentence and then a graphic and then a sentence and a graphic. And it was super cliche, it would be like, work on a team of rock stars, and then be a picture of Slash or something. And one sentence in this and one sentence in this. And then, but I get to the bottom, and the part that grabbed me and made me think, all right, I need to reach out to these guys, was I think the last sentence said something about, it was something about like work on a team where you're all fighting together, or you're all pushing together, something like that, something about teamwork. And the image was a rugby scrum where one of the teams in the rugby scrum was wearing like the same colored jerseys as the club team that I played on in Arizona. Super random, super small. I'm not the kind of person who believes in like, serendipity and fate, but it was just enough that I was like already interested. And I just, decided I had to reach out and like just see what the deal is here. There was enough of a connection, something was going on. So I email to the like contact us email address, contact us at ubercab.com, I think it literally was. And I basically say, hey, came across your site. I am a programmer by hobby, but I'm wondering if this is a real thing. Like what's going on here? And so I get an email back. I couldn't tell you if it was that afternoon or the next day maybe, but it was relatively quick. And a person emails me, they say their name is Ryan Graves. They say, who are you? How did you find this? Appreciate your interest. We get talking a little bit. And I think since I had included some of those technical skills in my first email, I think I was basically like, I'm not really looking for an internship, kind of playing hard to get, but is this something real? Is this something that I could put these programming skills that I have to use? And like, someone would pay me for this. This is finally my dream. And as luck would have it, some of those skills that I had taught myself were basically exactly what the original tech stack was at Uber Cab. It was PHP, which is what I taught myself. It was we would call it a LAMP stack, is kind of what it used to be called. Linux, Apache, PHP, Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP. And I had not worked with Apache directly, but those other three technologies were top of mind for me. And so I hop on a Skype call with Ryan Graves, and I remember it was a Friday that we Skyped for the first time. And I think he gave me like some take-home coding challenge to do over the next couple of days, or maybe over that weekend. And so I did that. I turned it back into him. We got talking a little bit more. And by the following Friday, he had already convinced me to buy a plane ticket out to San Francisco for the next Monday. So it was kind of like 10 days between first seeing him on Skype face-to-face and then seeing him in the office face-to-face. And it was just like, I don't know, it just sounded great. My skills lined up. I passed the little coding test, and he promised me, again, very, very hilariously cliche, he promised me a very Uber summer in San Francisco. And so, it was kind of funny in retrospect how quickly I went from not really wanting to do anything with my free time to flying to a new city to do what I assumed would be a relatively intense, like 10-week internship. But that was kind of how everything began. And, it's been truly, truly wild. So, I'm sure we'll get into other stories, but that was the path that led me to Uber in the first place, Uber Cab at least. And then later they changed the name.
Wow, super interesting. Super twist and turns, and it's super interesting to hear about that. So when you joined as an intern, how big was Uber? Number of rides per day, or how big was the team when you joined? How many engineers were there? Can you talk about that and your journey during the internship, right? How was the team culture? What was the mission? How did it head? And did Travis join at that time as well?
Yeah, so let me paint you the picture a little bit. So I fly into SFO. And any of your dozens of listeners who have been to San Francisco might know that the airport is not particularly close to the city. The office that I was going to was downtown, right in the financial district, but SFO is a bit to the south. And so in the final day lining up these logistics, I email Graves and I kind of say, once how do I get to the office, right? I'll make this up a little bit. I think I probably landed in the early afternoon, 2 or 3 p.m. So I wanted to stop by and see, meet people face to face and go from there. And I remember him emailing me back and he's like, there's BART, it's this train system, goes right to the airport. You can do that. That's great. He's like, or you can get a cab. And I kind of emailed back and I'm like, isn't this a transportation company? Isn't the product not a cab? What are we doing here? And it was only once I arrived and I think I took BART up and I got to the office and I kind of learned a little bit about what was going on. It turns out there were 3 drivers on the system and they were in the city. They were not down at the airport. So it would have been impossible for me to get an Uber cab. That was just not a thing at the time. In fact, to paint the picture even more concretely, there was so little demand. There were so few riders. We were paying drivers hourly just to keep the phones on their dashboard, in between their normal jobs. And so I show up at the office. It's 2 other people at this time. Conrad, who was the first engineer, and then Ryan Graves, who I had been corresponding with, who was kind of the first functioning CEO. And it wasn't even their own office space. It was a conference room in the back of another company, another startup called Zozy. And so I think someone opened the door for me. I didn't have the keypad number for Zozy or the badge. And they led me to this glass conference room and pulled in another chair for me. And I set up my laptop there next to Conrad, next to Graves. And that was kind of where everything began. If I'd made up some numbers, maybe at that point we were doing a dozen trips a week, but it was basically like these 3 drivers who were on, I don't know if we were paying them to be on like 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. and maybe longer on Friday, Saturdays. That was probably like, that kind of sounds about right. But the only riders were like the 3 employees, or I guess the 2.5 employees, because I was kind of just on a contract. And then just like friends who had been like convinced to sign up and download the app. And, we consider as a company, we consider June 1st of 2010, kind of the launch of the business. In reality, the app had existed both on the rider and the driver side in the earlier months of that year. But I think at the time that I came in kind of mid-June, it had only been a couple weeks since like you could even put a credit card into the app. So this was like very early on, very rudimentary. Obviously, it grew a fair amount during my internship, which is part of the reason I felt strongly about coming back. But this was bare bones. Just to put a real pin on it, like there was a Friday where I pushed some code that broke billing. We didn't bill anyone for the weekend, and like we realized it and fixed it when I came in on Monday. But we missed like 10 trips. It was like a couple trips on Friday night, a couple trips on Saturday, and then like an airport run on Sunday. Did we lose $800? Probably, but like the system was down, billing was down for 3 days. But it's just like the numbers barely mattered because there was just no scale to the business there. Every driver sign up was hard fought. Every rider sign up was hard fought. And we were just barely even trying to get our feet under ourselves on the development side. Conrad was doing iPhone and back end. I was doing back end, front end. It was just everyone was doing everything. And by everyone, I mean like the 3 of us as a business. And then over the course of my internship, hired the second engineer. His name was Ryan McKillen. And so my joke would be at one point, not counting me as the intern, 2/3 of the company was Ryan's, which is why we called Ryan Graves, and Ryan McKillen RM. We didn't really use first names, but hired him. We were in the process of interviewing a mobile developer by the time I left my internship. We hired kind of first ops person to run, to manage drivers and to get some signups on riders. That was Austin early on, and so it all kind of evolved from there. But it was kind of wild. I didn't know what to expect, but it was already probably smaller than what I expected when I showed up.
Oh, nice. At the end of your internship, I think it was 2 months internship, right?
It was almost exactly 2 months. Yeah, that's true. Right, like mid-June I left right before my birthday, mid-August.
How did the numbers look like at the end of to understand the growth in between?
Yeah, I distinctly remember the last weekend before I left. I think I flew out on a Monday or Tuesday, probably. I think I flew out on a Monday morning. I remember that last weekend we did 100 trips. It was our first weekend with triple-digit trips. And, that was probably like 40 on Friday and Saturday night, and then a couple on Sunday. But like, that was a big deal. Like we went from doing maybe a dozen when I came in 2 months prior to this triple digit thing. And it was awesome. Obviously, I don't know what it is now. Do we do that in like a second? Probably. I don't know. But it was pretty crazy. I had also, one of my early projects was just to do sorry, my dogs are barking in the background. I'm sure the listeners will love that. But one of my early projects on the internship was to just do some graphs and some charts kind of core metrics in our internal tools. And so I had a chart for, user sign up by day and by hour, or trips by day and by hour. And like when I first did that, it was almost hard to know if my code was working because they were basically all zeros, right? Like if we got a client sign up an hour, like that was kind of unusual. And then I remember the first time TechCrunch wrote about us, it was like 30 signups in the hour that article went live. And it was wild. It was great. This is going to be it. Everything takes off from here. And then like the next hour, it like dropped back down to like, 10 and then 2. And then we were back down to the normal amount. But it's interesting. Obviously, with hindsight, the numbers, like you couldn't even see them on the graph if it was log scale compared to what we do now. But it's kind of humbling to think about how that was back in the day, where like literally every sign up mattered. Like literally every individual person we signed up mattered. And so we were just doing it all the time. You'd see someone hailing a cab on the street and you've left work, you've shut your brain off for the day. But you're like, hey, you should download this thing. You should try it out. Same thing when you ran into a driver, it's just like, we were all pitching the product all the time because that was kind of what it was going to take to make it happen.
Oh, wow. Super interesting. And can you talk about the initial team culture in the internship days and how was the growth mindset at that time? And yeah, around that. If you
Yeah, it was interesting because even just between myself and the two engineers, kind of, at the midway towards the latter half maybe of my internship, we probably could not have been more different. So Conrad, he was very adamant about like a healthy work-life balance and keeping very normal hours, which was probably like, I'm going to make this up a little bit, 9 a.m. to 7 p.m., maybe 9 to 6, something like that. But he had friends, he had things he wanted to do. And so he was very intentionally good about like leaving the office and being done with work, unless there was an issue or something, obviously. I was the polar opposite because I had just flown into San Francisco. I knew no one other than the people I knew from work. Yeah, I did some sightseeing on the weekends and stuff. But for the most part, I just kind of worked because I was there to work. I was there to code. I was there to improve my coding. And so, I was the polar opposite from Conrad. I'd work past midnight because I knew there was a sushi spot that I liked by the room I was renting that was open till 4 a.m. So like, who cared? I was in there on Saturdays and Sundays because, I don't know, you can see Alcatraz and you can see Fisherman's Wharf. And then like, that's kind of it. I was 20. I wasn't 21. So San Francisco is a great city for eating and drinking, but I couldn't do any drinking. And so I just go to the office and like, work on some more work. And so, yeah, I was on the polar opposite, yes, because the business needed it. And yes, because like every sign up, as I was saying, mattered and hustling mattered for the business, but also just because that was what I wanted to do. That was what I came to do. And so that was what I chose my time doing. And then RM, when he came in, he was a good mix of both. He loved burning the midnight oil and he would crank on a project. But he also, similar to Conrad, he had other friends, he had other things he did. He was in CrossFit at this time. And so he kept some schedules doing other things as well. But if we talked about a project to work on, he'd come in on us on a Saturday and we would figure it out too. He was a little bit of a balance to Conrad in my extremes. It was small. We were all sitting around the table, like metaphorically and literally. And so, as we hired those first couple people, and then there's echoes of this too when I came in full time, everyone was just like really in on the mission and in on what we were doing. And did that mean you stayed in the office until 6 or 7 or midnight? Everyone had a different perspective on that. But people were pretty all in on it mentality wise. And that was just kind of the expectation. It was the expectation when you went through the interview process. We kind of filtered for that because what we were doing was novel and hard, and it took a degree of dedication. And so that was how it felt early on. And I would say that was even increased by an order of magnitude when Travis came in, because not that Graves worked hard, but Travis is like an orders of magnitude more intensity. And so, there's a peer pressure aspect to that as well. That's more into my full-time experience. I'm not sure if we're done transitioning out of internship. I'll leave that to you, but we'll leave that as a segue for later maybe.
Yeah, thanks a lot for going deep dive into your internship. So did you get a full-time offer? What's the story behind that?
Yeah, I did. It's a pretty good story, I think. So I actually don't know when I bought my return flight. If I bought it at the same time, or I probably did buy a round trip ticket in the first place. And so there was always kind of a date on the calendar. I want to say August 12th, just because that sticks in my mind. It was something around there, a couple days before my birthday. And so, there was a pretty firm date that I had contracted, this duration for. I knew people were getting hired. The company was kind of working pretty well, but I didn't really think too much of it. I actually really enjoyed kind of the finality of it. It's like having a date where I knew I was leaving. It was like a big motivator for me, right? Like I got to finish the projects I want to do before then. I've only got this much time to like maybe explore a little bit of San Francisco while I'm here. It was like a kind of a good motivator. And if that was a Monday I was flying out, I'm pretty sure it was, then on Friday, which was really my last day in the office, I'm working late, as we were just talking about. I don't know if it was 6 or 7, something like that. RM and Conrad had already left. Graves was finishing up. And as Graves leaves the office, kind of walking past me to get to the door, he like slides a piece of paper across the table that was all of our desks to me. And he, I don't know, he says something to the effect of, like just something for you to consider tonight or whatever. Like, and then he like quickly leaves, like walks out, no time for questions. And so I flipped this thing over very dramatically. Right. And it was a job offer. It was a full-time job offer. And, my first thought is, this is great. This is what I came for, right? I got to do 2 months of learning how to program. And then this is a chance to kind of do this kind of full-time ideal, right? And then my second thought was, well, maybe I should like read the details on this first. And there were a couple critical pieces. First of all, it was a exploding offer. I had to decide, I think within 24 hours, 24 or 48 hours. It was probably 24 hours. Or the offer was going to expire, right? I could not hold on to this thing. And more importantly, it was an offer to start work immediately. Stay in San Francisco. Graves, it was very specifically like a cancel your flight and stay here to come on full time. Forego your senior year in college, that you had built up 3 years towards, and come out, stay out, I guess, and do the full-time thing. And the equity, it was kind of funny. At this point, we'd already raised seed funding, but equity was being measured in percentages still. And so it said 1% ownership was what the equity grant was going to be associated with this. But in very firm letters, like, you only got 24 hours to decide, and this is to stay here and not go back to school, to be clear. So my next thought, after my first thought, which was, this is great, my next thought was like, well, I kind of had a lot of plans for my senior year. I got friends who I'm looking forward to going back and seeing. I was elected vice president of the class with my best friend as the president. And I've got obligations on other student government things. I have an executive role in my fraternity, to say nothing of I'm most of the way through my class, and like I should have a degree for all of this work. And so, this is a hard decision. And so what I did, what any adult would do, I called my parents and I called my friends and I called my brother and I talked to everyone. I might have talked to Conrad and RM, I can't remember. But, I literally spent that night, probably most of it in the office, I think, like talking to people without, I guess, really realizing that they were 3 hours ahead of me for the most part. So it was even later for them. It was a big decision. It was like, what do I do about this? Even forgetting the equity side, which we now know is worth a lot. You could probably squint and should probably pretend that was basically worth zero at that point. But like, I don't know, real full-time paying job, like, isn't that the point of college? Does that make sense to leave early then? Because this is the goal anyways. But at the same time, if this thing doesn't work out and I don't have a degree, like I put in all of the effort, could I go back later? Maybe not. People do, but not really. Like, do you kind of get stuck? It's not the same. It wouldn't be the same class, wouldn't be the same friends, even if I went back. And so like, there's a thousand decisions there to make. And there's really no correct decision. And I think I realized this even in the moment, in a vacuum. Like, there is only a gamble that you're making either way. And you're doing some risk assessments. You're kind of picturing what your life could be like in 5 or 10 years on each side of it. And at the end of the day, I decided that there were enough check marks in the go back to school column compared to the stay in San Francisco column. I declined the offer. I don't know what that looked like. Did I email Graves? Did I come in on Monday before I flew out? I don't remember exactly, but declined the offer and flew back home. Had, 2 weeks or so in Connecticut before I went back to college. And then had, did my senior year thing, did my capstone projects, fulfilled these obligations I had in student government and all these other pieces. But I kept up, I watched the news, and to the extent that Uber cab was in the news at that point, relatively limited. I emailed a little bit with these guys over time. It was while I was in my senior year that Travis came in and replaced Graves as CEO. And so, I kind of kept up on some of this stuff. In February, I don't know why I remember it was February, but in February, it was like into my last semester enough that I wanted to kind of figure out what was going to happen after graduation. And so I remember kind of texting Travis, because we had met during the internship, even though he wasn't CEO yet. But I remember texting Travis and we hopped on the phone, and I was kind of like, well, now I have a date for graduation. I know when I'm done here, like I would like to come back to Uber. It was now Uber instead of Uber cab. like I was basically like, let me know what the process is going to be. Who should I talk to interview, and what'll that look like? Are we still doing a coding challenge, stuff like that? And I remember him basically being like, listen, there's he's like, you can come back. He's like, just tell me when you're starting. He said, tell me when your graduation date is and tell me how much time you want after that. And I'll send over an offer, and just tell me when you're coming back to San Francisco. So I did. And so that was what happened. I actually don't remember if it was before or after that. It might have been right before that. I did a trip to San Francisco during my senior year, unrelated to the fact that I had already been there. I actually was heading down to NASA Ames, which is a research facility for an event I had been invited to. But I got to stop by the office. I met the crew. The team had expanded a little bit at that time. I think it was before I had kind of finalized an offer and coming back. But everything kind of worked out. He sent over an offer. We quibbled a little bit on some details. It was not. It was about an order of magnitude difference on the equity side, because they had raised another round of funding and all of these pieces. And so, which has some funny anecdotes on its own. Travis knew that I had been offered and that I declined kind of this earlier one. And so, fast forward a number of years, Uber's valuation as a business has grown substantially. Travis would always introduce me to people as, this is Dom. He had the most expensive senior year of college ever, because of that opportunity cost. And that would kind of be a running joke. But, I would very quickly follow up by saying, don't shed a tear for me. Everything turned out okay. But it became an ongoing thing. But yeah, so I graduated in May of 2011. I did spend maybe a week kind of around, kicking around town, packing up my stuff. Spent a couple of days in Las Vegas because that was close to where I went to school. And so we would kind of celebrate graduation there, and then flew to San Francisco and then started full-time work from there.
I hope you enjoyed the first part of this series where we discussed Dom's journey to get into Uber and a bit of Uber's journey in the initial phase. In the next episode, we'll dive deeper into Uber's initial phase, and you'll get to know how Uber became one of the hottest startups of all time. Do like, subscribe, share, and turn on the notification so that you'll get notified when the next episode arrives.